Good morning and welcome to the Sunday morning sermon for Black Rock Baptist Church. We've been looking at a series of messages, a series entitled Keep Calm and Trust God. This is number 6 in the series, and we're going to talk a little about dealing with temptation as we focus on Genesis chapter 39, the first 20 verses 1 through 20. Well, when we left Joseph last Sunday, he had been sold into slavery by his brothers to a band of Ishmaelite traders who were on their way to Egypt. And then in Egypt, we learned that he's sold into slavery to a man by the name of Potiphar. Joseph must have realized as his journey continued that whatever lay ahead of him in Egypt must be somehow part of God's plan for his life, and that God would preserve and God would protect him there in Egypt. It's encouraging to realize that we don't have to know how God's plan is going to work out in order to know that it is going to work out. We don't have to know why, or we don't have to know how. Joseph learned 2 lessons. One, he learned that God had a plan for his life. And secondly, he learned that that plan required faithfulness on his part. Those 2 truths governed and influenced everything that Joseph did. And everyone around him took note that there was something different about Joseph. This is more than a story of intrigue. It's a story of the clash of 2 cultures or 2 standards of living. Joseph represents those who belong to God, those whose lives are a reflection of God's revealed truth. Potiphar's wife, on the other hand, represents those who we see in high authority. No higher authority than themselves in their mind, who live only for the gratification of their own desires. When we view this story from this perspective, we see that it's more than just an ancient drama. We see that it's a drama that's still being acted out in our culture today. As the people of God, we are still called to live out the revealed truth of God's Word. But we still find that we're living in a culture that is not only hostile to the things of God, but it's also intent on seducing the children of God to live on their level. Well, let's look at our text from Genesis chapter 39. Verse 1 says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had put under his authority. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house, and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate." Can you imagine being Joseph at that time? Sold into slavery by your brothers and then living his life in such a way that others trust him. And yet Joseph lived in such a way that Potiphar saw that Jehovah was the source of his success. Joseph's life brought praise from an important officer of the king, even though he was a pagan. Let me ask you, have our lives had that kind of effect on the ungodly, on the unsaved? Well, today I want to share with you 5 principles concerning temptation drawn from the life of Joseph. So that's where we're headed this morning. And the first principle is this: temptation often comes when you least expect it. The latter part of verse 6 and verse 7 says, "Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph. And she said, 'Lie with me.'" Joseph was at the top of the world. All his hard work was paying off, and it was now that he was in a responsible position. And it is now that temptation comes. Beware of temptation when you have experienced victory or you think you've arrived in life. Temptation came to King David when he was in his 50s. He had unified the kingdom. He had expanded his borders and brought peace to the region. It was then that he was tempted and fell. The Hebrew language has a wonderful way of telling what Potiphar's wife did. It literally says that she lifted up her eyes at Joseph. The Living Bible says that she made eyes at him. But if he had not picked up on what Mrs. Potiphar wanted, he made it crystal clear, or she made it crystal clear with her words, "Come and lie with me." Joseph could have given in to Potiphar's wife. Perhaps he could have tried to justify it because of all the bad that had happened to him. It doesn't matter that she was lonely or attractive or available or anything else. Wrong is wrong no matter what. Perhaps we need to stop at this point and establish a very important truth. And that is that it's not a sin to be tempted. Many Christians have felt needless guilt because they've been tempted. And they have equated temptation with sin. The sin is in yielding to temptation, not in being tempted. Even the Lord himself was tempted, and yet according to Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, he was without sin. Temptation is a sign that we live in a fallen world. It's not temptation that matters, rather it's how we respond to that temptation that really matters. Principle number 2, temptation always tries to make sin look acceptable. We need to have our reasons in mind before temptation comes our way. We need to make up our minds about sin in advance. If we wait until we're tempted, then it's going to be too late. And because Joseph had settled those matters beforehand in his own mind, Joseph did not hesitate to put those beliefs into practice. The first thing he did was he endeavored to reason with Potiphar's wife. Verses 8 and 9 says, "But he refused and said to his master's wife, 'Look, my master does not know what is with me, or what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this? How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? The Bible says simply that Joseph refused. He pointed out the sacredness of marriage. If you're of the opinion that just running out on your marriage is a light thing and will solve all your problems, please think long and hard about what God has to say about that matter. Joseph knew his character. His reputation and the trust that had been placed in him by his master were at stake here. He did not see this as some harmless act, but he viewed this as a sin against God. For Joseph to violate the Lord's will in this matter would certainly damage whatever testimony Joseph had among the Egyptians. It would have destroyed his witness. It would have determined or undermined any trust that his master may have been developing in him and the one true God. Joseph recognized that sin is not alternative facts or innocent experimentation. Sin is wickedness, and it remains so regardless of what we rename it. We can always find some way to rationalize and make excuses when we want to yield to temptation. In addition, Joseph saw that sin was something that is always harmful to other human beings. There are people who trust us not to yield to temptation, our children, our marital partners, our fellow Christians, and last but not least, our watching lost friends and associates. Joseph also understood that sin is primarily an offense against God. Like David later on prayed after his sin with Bathsheba, David prayed, "Against you and you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, God." The words "against you" and "only you" carry the meaning of against you and you in particular have I sinned. The temptation was strong because it came to Joseph repeatedly. Joseph refuses her advances 4 times in our text. Her requests, which sought to bring the two into closer contact, were totally refused. Verse 10 says, "So it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her." Not only did Joseph consistently refuse the invitation of Potiphar's wife, he eventually refused to even be around her, to be with her. What wisdom we see in Joseph's actions here. If you want to avoid sin, stay away from the places and the people and the things that entice you to sin. And she succeeded in seducing Joseph. It's probable that would have been their first and last of their extramarital encounters. It ended right there. Someone said temptation is like a telemarketer. It comes to us when it's least convenient. It comes back again and again. It keeps pushing even after we've said no, and it makes what it is selling, sound great. But there's always a catch. Well, moving on to principle number 4. Number 4, to be victorious over temptation, you may have to literally remove yourself. Joseph had the good sense to flee from temptation. He had to run to get away from this woman. Verses 11 and 12 says, "But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, 'Lie with me.' But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside." I like the way the King James Version phrases what happened there. It says, he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out of there. Nobody else was going to get him out of there. If he was going to resist the sin, he had to get himself out of there. This was no time to reason with this woman. It was not a time to pray about it or to meditate about it. The only godly course of action is to flee from her. Paul warns us, flee from sexual immorality, 1 Corinthians 6:18. Paul also reminds us in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, that no temptation has seized you except what is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way so that you can stand up under it. There is a way out for those who will take it. We sometimes like to see how close we can get to sin. Joseph was interested only in getting as far away as he possibly could from sin. We often have a tendency to walk as close as we can, as close as we can get, before we then try to get away. It's true of immorality, it's true of other sins in our lives. The longer we wait to say no, the harder it is to do so. Instead of acting decisively against sin, we flirt with it. We see how far we can go without getting burned. We fantasize. We say no, but we play with yes. We return again and again to play with sin, but that's just foolishness. The more we play, the weaker we become. Before long, we've lost all perspective, and we develop desires that are powerful and destructive. The moment we allow ourselves to debate the merits of wrong behavior, we've given the devil a foothold. In most of our situations, we cannot say that the temptation we face is beyond our control. Many of the temptations we face are those that we have allowed or perhaps even encouraged to be around us and to enter into our lives. Well, principle number 5, being victorious over temptation will not necessarily make us popular. Verses 13 through 20 read this way. It says, "And so it was when he saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the men of the house and spoke to them, saying, 'See, he has brought into us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside.' So she kept his garment with her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to me to mock me. So it happened as I lifted my voice and cried out that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, Your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison." Two things happen here very quickly. Potiphar's wife brings a false accusation, and Joseph is unjustly imprisoned. Perhaps part of her motivation is in making this false accusation was to protect herself in case her flirtatious conduct was brought to the attention of her husband. In such an event, she wanted to have herself covered. No doubt Potiphar's wife's plan also was to make Joseph regret his resistance. As is often the case, the passion of love can quickly turn to hate. For doing what was right, Joseph is cast into prison. What made Joseph's imprisonment even more difficult to bear was that it was utterly, unequivocally unjust. He shouldn't have been there. Some Christians today seem to think that obedience should always bring success and prosperity to our lives. Joseph's imprisonment should cause us to rethink the success strategies that are popular in our circles. Obedience does not shield us from pain. The good guys do not always win immediately. Yes, sometimes bad things do happen to good people. Keep calm and trust God. We will need to draw this all together this morning. If we are going to be victorious over sin and temptation, we need to take a lesson from Joseph. When you are tempted to do wrong this week, just refuse. When Satan whispers in your ear, "Go ahead, everyone's doing it," just refuse. When you feel like giving in and giving somebody a piece of your mind, just remember, you don't have that much to spare. Smile and just refuse. When a friend or an acquaintance asks you to do something that is not ethical, just remember who you are and just refuse. All of us can identify with the words of C.S. Lewis when he said, "No man knows how bad he is until he has tried to be good." Perhaps there have been times in the past when you weren't victorious over temptation. Lord knows we've all been there. You're filled with shame at the recollection of past failure. Joseph stood firm in that time of temptation, but you've fallen. Because of past failure, we're often tempted to give up in our efforts to live a pure life and instead just go on sinning more. It doesn't matter what we do from that point on. We believe we've already sinned and we may as well continue. But the truth is that there is forgiveness, there is restoration available to all who come to the Lord. 1 John chapter 1 verse 9 says, "If we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sin and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness." 5 principles concerning temptation. Temptation often comes when we least expect it. Temptation always tries to make sin acceptable. To be victorious over temptation, we need to avoid known areas of temptation. Sometimes you just have to remove yourself from the situation. And number 5, being victorious over temptation will not necessarily make you popular. God bless. Have a wonderful day, and until we meet again, let's continue to exchange prayers daily.